An old equipment shed door rattles upward. Annie Colter walked past the blue seed box almost every morning for 19 years. It sat under the seed bench in her father's equipment shed, dented on one corner with a strip of masking tape across the lid. Planter bolts. That was all it said. Annie never opened it because she thought she knew what was inside. She was wrong. Inside that box was the only paper standing between her family farm and a land company that had already put survey flags across their best field. Brief reset. Her father, Nolan Colter, died on December 3, 2014. He was 72 years old. He had farmed corn, soybeans, and a little winter wheat outside St. John's, Michigan, since the late 1960s, mostly on ground that had passed through the family in ordinary ways. Deeds, mortgages, tax bills, and long seasons of work that made the same land feel older than any document attached to it. Annie was 44 when he died. She had left the farm at 18, worked 15 years in Lansing, and come home after a factory office closed and her mother got sick. What started as temporary became permanent. By the time Nolan was gone, Annie could run the grain dryer. She could change a bearing on the old auger. She could negotiate seed prices. She could tell by the sound of the combine when the beans were getting too tough. What she could not read, pause not yet, was her father's paper life. Nolan had a way of keeping records that looked careless to anyone who did not know him. He kept bank folders in the house, machinery manuals in a steel cabinet, old plat maps rolled in a feed sack. He wrote dates on envelopes, then he saved the envelopes too. So after the funeral, Annie started where a sensible person would start: the desk in the back room, the safe in the bedroom closet, the 4-drawer file cabinet beside the freezer. She found crop insurance papers, loan documents, seed invoices going back to 1998, tied in bundles with orange baler twine. She found the deed to the home ground, and she found the mortgage release her father had saved like a trophy. But she did not find anything that explained the North Ditch Farm. Short silence, that was what everyone called it. 240 acres beyond the county drain, flat black soil with a ragged windbreak on the west side and one low patch that held water in wet springs. The Colters had planted it as long as Annie had been alive. Nolan had treated it like part of the operation. Annie had treated it that way too. The tax records did not. When she called the county register's office, the clerk was kind, but careful. The North Ditch Farm was not in Nolan Colter's name. It had never been in his name. The legal owner was the Manley Family Trust, created after a man named Ira Manley died in 1992. The trust had 3 beneficiaries, 2 successor trustees, and enough old disagreement inside it that nobody local wanted to explain it over the phone. Annie wrote the names down on the back of an elevator receipt and stared at them until the paper blurred. For 3 days she worked like a person pretending not to be afraid. She checked bins, paid the fuel bill, fed the barn cats. She drove past the North Ditch Farm twice and saw orange survey flags at the end rows, bright as warning lights against the frozen stalks. A cold metal latch clicks. On the 4th day, she went into the equipment shed looking for a hitch pin. The shed was cold enough that her breath showed. A strip of winter light came through the gap under the sliding door. She bent under the seed bench, pulled out the blue metal box, and heard paper slide inside it. Not bolts. Pause paper. The lid was stiff with rust. When it opened, the smell was old dust, mouse poison, and dry ink. On top was a rubber-banded stack of rent receipts. Beneath that were envelopes, 9 of them. Each had Nolan's handwriting on the front. Manley ground. Keep. Do not burn. Annie sat down on an upside-down chemical bucket and opened the first envelope. SFX dry paper unfolds. The oldest paper was dated March 1977. It was a farm lease between Ira Manley and Annie's grandfather, Walter Colter. The rent was $41 an acre. It covered the same 240 acres. It had the signatures of both men and a notary stamp so faint she had to tilt the page toward the light. The newest lease was dated February 2012. It ran through the 2016 crop year. It was signed by Nolan and by the acting trustee of the Manley Trust. It listed rent at $164 an acre, and on page 5, in a paragraph Annie almost missed because it was typed smaller than the rest, was the sentence her father had kept safe for 37 years. If the owner accepts a third-party offer to purchase the leased premises, the tenant shall have the first option to purchase the premises by written exercise within 45 days of certified notice. The purchase price was not whatever the buyer had offered. It was a formula from an old appraisal schedule attached to the lease. 240 tillable acres at $1,150 an acre, $276,000. Brief reset. Annie did not understand all of it. She understood enough to call a lawyer. His name was Martin Klein. He practiced in a brick office beside a hardware store in DeWitt, and he had handled enough farm estates to know that the smallest paragraph in an old lease could matter more than the loudest promise in a new sale contract. He asked Annie one question first.
Did your father receive notice?
Annie did not know. Martin told her to look for certified mail, not bills, not regular letters, certified notice. That changed the search. Annie went back through the house files again. Nothing. She checked the truck glove box. Nothing. She checked the grain office, the tack room, the clipboards beside the dryer panel. At 9:30 that night, she found it in the lid pocket of her father's old Carhartt chore coat. The envelope had been opened. Certified mail. Received November 17, 2014. The Manly trustees had accepted an offer from Great Lakes Land Holdings for $518,400. The buyer wanted the field for a long-term land investment. Closing was planned for January. 45 days from November 17 was January 1, but the courthouse would not be open on New Year's Day. The practical deadline was December 31. Annie found the letter on December 21. She had 10 days. Tighten rhythm. There are moments when grief becomes something more useful because it has no room to spread out. Annie had not finished crying for her father. She had not finished sorting his shirts, canceling his phone, or learning which neighbors to call first when the auger motor failed. But now there was a clock on the wall, and the clock was attached to 240 acres of soil her family had worked for nearly 4 decades. Martin Klein drafted the notice the next morning. On December 23, 2014, at 10:06 a.m., he filed Annie Colter's exercise of purchase option with the County Register of Deeds. Then he drove to the post office and sent copies by certified mail to both trustees, all 3 beneficiaries, and the attorney for Great Lakes Land Holdings. The land company did not take it quietly. Their lawyer argued that the option was too old. Then he argued that the trust had not properly approved every renewal. Then he argued that Nolan's death ended the tenants right before Annie could use it. Martin had expected all 3 arguments. The blue seed box answered the first 2. Nolan had saved every renewal, every rent receipt, the letters where each trustee accepted payment, the 1996 memo naming the acting trustee, the 2004 farm service map with the Manly parcel outlined in pencil. He had even saved a carbon copy of a letter he sent in 2009 asking the trust whether the option clause remained part of the renewal. The trustee had written one word back, yes. Short silence. The third argument failed because Annie was Nolan's successor on the lease, and the crop operation had not stopped. The lease said tenant and assigns. It was dry language. It was also the hinge the whole field turned on. The Manly beneficiaries were tired. They had fought over that land for years, and none of them had planted it, drained it, fenced it, or stood on it long enough to know where the low ground began. Great Lakes Land Holdings had offered more money, but the trust had signed leases that said what would happen if another buyer came along. On January 16, the company withdrew its objection. On January 29, 2015, Annie closed on the North Ditch Farm for $276,000. She borrowed $220,000 from Farm Credit. The note was 20 years at 4.75%. She used the home place as collateral, and that scared her enough that she signed her name slowly. The payment was more than she wanted. The timing was worse than she was ready for. But the field stayed in the operation. Brief reset. That spring, Annie planted soybeans there. She walked the end rows in May and found 2 survey flags the company crew had missed. She pulled them out by hand and carried them back to the truck like they were weeds. For a while, the purchase did not feel like a victory. It felt like another obligation. More debt, more phone calls, more reasons to wake up at 3 a.m. and do math in the dark. Then the years started doing what years do. By 2021, comparable ground along that drain was selling for more than $4,800 an acre. The North Ditch farm was worth well over $1 million on paper. Annie did not sell it. She kept farming it. By the fall of 2023, the loan balance was down to $78,000. That December, after a strong corn crop and a storage premium she had waited all winter to take, Annie paid off the note. She was 53 years old. The blue seed box is still under the seed bench. The original documents are not in it anymore. Annie moved them to a fireproof safe after Martin Klein told her, twice, that sentiment was not a records management system. But she kept copies in the box in the same envelopes, with her father's writing still on the front. Manly ground. Keep, do not burn. A neighbor once asked Annie whether Nolan had meant for her to find the papers that way. Whether he had hidden them in the one place only a farm kid would eventually look. Whether he knew when he put that certified letter in his chore coat that he might not be the person who finished the job. Annie said she had stopped trying to decide. Maybe her father had planned it perfectly. Maybe he had run out of time. Maybe he had been sicker than he admitted and trusted habit to do what words could not. What mattered was that he had been paying attention long before anyone else thought there was anything to notice. Slow slightly, Nolan Colter did not leave his daughter a loophole. He left her 37 years of proof, a lease signed when rent was $41 an acre, a clause renewed by people who barely remembered signing it, receipts that turned a family habit into a legal trail. One word from a trustee in 2009, one certified letter opened and saved before the hospital took the rest of his strength. The field did not stay in the family because Annie got lucky. It stayed because her father treated paper the way he treated soil, nothing wasted, nothing guessed at, nothing left where weather could take it. Pause. Some people leave land, some people leave money. Nolan Colter left a blue seed box under a workbench, full of old pages that were quiet until the day they became louder than a $500,000 sale contract. And in the end, that was enough.